I'm Ruby 31, and I grew up as the invisible daughter. While my parents celebrated every breath my perfect sister Charlotte took, I learned to live in her shadow. When Marcus proposed, they delivered their ultimatum: postpone the wedding until after Charlotte marries, or they wouldn't attend. I chose love over their approval, and they missed the most stunning lighthouse ceremony on the New England coast, a property my grandfather secretly left to me. Before I dive into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to choose yourself over family expectations. Have you ever stood your ground when it mattered most? Let me know in the comments below. Growing up as Charlotte Harrison's younger sister was like living next to a spotlight that never shined on me. From the moment she brought home her first perfect report card in kindergarten, my parents decided she was the golden child, the one destined for greatness. I was just Ruby, the afterthought, the spare. Our modest colonial home in Deerfield, Connecticut had walls lined with Charlotte's achievements: debate team trophies, honor roll certificates, newspaper clippings of her winning the regional spelling bee 3 years in a row. My mother, Elizabeth, kept a special photo album she called Charlotte's Journey to Excellence. There was no album for my journey. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. Charlotte was 3 years older, but the gap felt like decades when my parents measured our accomplishments. When Charlotte won the science fair in 7th grade, my parents took the entire family out for a celebration dinner at the fanciest restaurant in town. When I won first place in the school art show that same year, my mother glanced at my painting of our backyard oak tree and said, "That's nice, dear. Did you finish your math homework?" My father, Richard, a corporate attorney, had mapped out Charlotte's entire life by the time she was 10. She would attend an Ivy League school, become a lawyer like him, join a prestigious firm, and marry the son of one of his golf buddies. Everything Charlotte did was a step toward fulfilling this grand vision. My interests in photography and art were dismissed as cute hobbies that would never lead to anything substantial. "You can't build a future on taking pictures," my father would say whenever he caught me with my camera, a secondhand Canon I'd saved up for by babysitting neighbors' children. The only person who seemed to see me was my grandfather William, my mother's father. After my grandmother passed away, he lived alone in a small house near the historic lighthouse he maintained as part of his job with the Coastal Preservation Society. On weekends, when the comparisons at home became too much, I would bike the 3 miles to his house and sit with him on his porch overlooking the Atlantic. "You've got a good eye, Ruby Tuesday," he would say, using the nickname he'd given me after the Rolling Stones song. He was the only one who bothered to look at my photographs, offering gentle suggestions and honest praise. "You capture what others miss. That's a rare gift." During summer breaks, I would spend weeks at a time with Grandpa William at his house by the lighthouse. He taught me about light and shadow, about patience, in waiting for the perfect moment to capture an image. Those were the only times I felt truly seen. Meanwhile, back at home, the Charlotte show continued. When she was crowned prom queen, my parents framed the newspaper photo and hung it in our living room. When she was accepted to Yale just 40 minutes from our home, they threw a party and invited everyone they knew. "Your sister is going to Yale," my mother told people at church, at the grocery store, at the gas station. "Full scholarship. She's going to follow in her father's footsteps." When I showed interest in photography schools on the West Coast, my mother's face fell. "But why so far away? There are perfectly good schools around here," she said, though she'd never bothered to research which schools had good art programs. "I think it would be good for Ruby to spread her wings," Grandpa William said during a Sunday dinner, one of the few allies I had at the family table. "She's got talent that needs room to grow." My father scoffed, cutting into his roast beef with surgical precision. "Photography isn't a real career, Dad. She needs something practical to fall back on." "Like law?" William raised an eyebrow. "Because the world definitely needs more lawyers." That comment earned him a glare from my father and a quick change of subject from my mother. When I was 17, my photography teacher, Ms. Reynolds, entered one of my photographs in a statewide competition without telling me. It was a black and white image of an elderly fisherman's weathered hands mending a net, the lighthouse visible as a blurry sentinel in the background. To everyone's surprise, except perhaps Ms. Reynolds and Grandpa William, I won. The award ceremony was scheduled on a Saturday afternoon in Hartford. I called home excited to share the news. "That's wonderful, honey," my mother said, distracted. But Charlotte has her debate final that day. It's the state championship, you know. We've already arranged to drive her. But this is important to me, I said, my voice small. Couldn't Dad take Charlotte while you come to my thing? Don't be selfish, Ruby, she replied. This is Charlotte's big moment. She's worked so hard. I'm sure your teacher can take pictures of your ceremony for us. In the end, Grandpa William drove me to Hartford. He sat in the front row beaming with pride as I accepted my award. Afterward, he took me to dinner and presented me with a gift, a new camera lens I had been saving up for. Your eye for beauty deserves the best tools, he said. When we returned home that evening, my parents were hosting an impromptu party for Charlotte, who had won her debate competition. No one asked about my ceremony. The award certificate ended up in my desk drawer rather than on the wall with Charlotte's achievements. That night, I made a decision that would shape the rest of my life. As soon as I graduated high school, I would leave Connecticut and the shadow of Charlotte behind. I would go somewhere I could be Ruby, not Charlotte's little sister. Somewhere I could breathe. I chose the California College of the Arts in San Francisco, about as far from Connecticut as I could get without leaving the continental United States. When my acceptance letter arrived, my mother looked as if I'd announced I was joining a cult. But Charlotte is at Yale, she said, as if geographic proximity to my sister was a requirement for higher education. Wouldn't you rather stay closer to home? I think San Francisco will be good for my photography, I said, already imagining the Golden Gate Bridge through my viewfinder. The rolling fog, the dramatic coastline. Well, my father sighed, closing his newspaper. I suppose we can't stop you. But don't expect us to fund this little adventure. Your college fund is for a real education. Fortunately, my portfolio had earned me a partial scholarship, and Grandpa Williams secretly set up a separate account to help with expenses. Consider it an investment in your future, he said when he slipped me a checkbook with my name on it. I believe in you even when they don't. Moving to San Francisco was like stepping into color after a lifetime in black and white. Suddenly, I was surrounded by people who valued creativity, who didn't see art as a hobby, but as a valid life pursuit. For the first time, I didn't have to explain or justify my passion for photography. Charlotte remained at Yale following the carefully charted course our parents had laid out for her. She graduated summa cum laude, went straight to Yale Law School, and secured a position at a prestigious firm in Hartford before she'd even passed the bar. Every Christmas and Thanksgiving when I flew home, I would hear endless recitations of Charlotte's latest accomplishments. Did you know Charlotte just made junior partner youngest in the firm's history? My mother would say, not bothering to ask about my own career progress. Meanwhile, I was building a life in California. After graduation, I landed an internship with a well-known nature photographer, which led to assignments for travel magazines and eventually exhibitions in local galleries. I specialized in coastal landscapes and architectural photography, often combining the two in ways that caught the attention of design publications. It was during an assignment for a music magazine that I met Marcus. His band was playing at a small venue in the Mission District, and I was there to capture images for an article on the city's indie music scene. I noticed him immediately, not just because he was handsome with his dark curls and warm brown eyes, but because of how he commanded attention on stage without seeming to try. There was an authenticity to him that my camera loved. After the show, I approached him for some additional shots. The lighting in here is challenging, I explained, adjusting my settings. He smiled, creating a dimple in his left cheek. I'm pretty sure you could make a dumpster look good with that camera. We ended up talking until the venue closed, then continued at an all-night diner where he sketched chord progressions on napkins, while I showed him some of my favorite shots on my camera's display. It turned out Marcus wasn't just a musician, but also a sound engineer with his own small recording studio. He understood the technical aspects of my work in a way most people didn't. Our relationship developed slowly over the next 3 years. We were both focused on building our careers, but we found ourselves gravitating toward each other, sharing studio spaces, collaborating on projects. Marcus composed scores for multimedia exhibitions of my work. I designed album covers and promotional materials for his band. We became partners in creativity before we became partners in life. During those years, my professional reputation grew. I had my first solo exhibition at a respected gallery in San Francisco, followed by features in photography magazines. When I called home to share the news of my first major sale, a series of lighthouse images purchased by a corporate collection, my mother listened politely before changing the subject to Charlotte's new condo purchase. "It's in the best neighborhood in Hartford," she gushed. "Two bedrooms, though she hardly needs the second one. Your father and I keep hoping she'll meet someone worthy of her." That was another recurring theme Charlotte's love life, or lack thereof. For all her professional success, my sister seemed unable to maintain a relationship longer than a few months. Our parents blamed it on the men not being good enough, but from my rare conversations with Charlotte, I suspected the issue was more complicated. "They expect me to marry someone just like Dad," she confided during one of our infrequent phone calls. "But I've dated enough lawyers to know that's not what I want." It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd had as adults. Charlotte rarely showed vulnerability trained from childhood to present perfection to the world. In that moment, I felt a flicker of genuine connection with my sister, a sense that perhaps we were both struggling under the weight of our parents' expectations, just in different ways. The summer I turned 25, Grandpa William invited me home for a special birthday celebration. When I arrived at his lighthouse cottage, he seemed frailer than I remembered his once sturdy frame, now stooped, his hands slightly trembling. But his eyes were as bright as ever when he handed me a large envelope. "Happy birthday, Ruby Tuesday," he said. Inside was a deed to the lighthouse property transferred to my name. "Grandpa, what is this?" I asked, stunned. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "I've been the caretaker here for 40 years. When the Preservation Society decided to privatize some of their properties, I made sure this one came to me. And now it's yours." "But this is your home," I protested. "And I'll live here until I'm gone," he assured me. "But afterward, it should belong to someone who truly sees its beauty, someone who can preserve it and share it with the world. That's you, Ruby." I was overwhelmed by the gift, not just the property itself, which was substantial, but the faith he had in me. The lighthouse had been my childhood sanctuary, the place I felt most at peace. The idea of it one day becoming my home stirred something deep within me. "You could turn the keeper's house into a studio," William suggested. "Maybe even host small exhibitions. The lighthouse itself needs to remain functional, of course, but there's plenty you could do with the property." That night, sitting on his porch watching the beam from the lighthouse sweep across the darkness, I shared my news about Marcus. "He sounds like a good man," William said. "You light up when you talk about him?" "He is," I confirmed. "He sees me, Grandpa, not as someone's sister or daughter, but as myself." William nodded, understanding the significance of that statement in a way only he could. "Bring him here sometime. I'd like to meet the man who makes my Ruby happy." 6 months later, Marcus and I flew to Connecticut for Christmas. It was his first time meeting my family, and I had prepared him as best I could for the Charlotte-centric dynamic of the Harrison household. What I hadn't prepared him for was Charlotte herself, who arrived from Hartford with a new sports car and an agenda. "Ruby," she exclaimed, air-kissing both my cheeks. "You look so California." She turned to Marcus, extending a manicured hand. "And you must be the musician. Mom mentioned Ruby was dating someone creative." The way she said creative made it sound like a questionable life choice, like taking up skydiving or joining a commune. Dinner that evening was a masterclass in subtle undermining. Charlotte dominated the conversation with stories of her important cases and high-profile clients. When Marcus mentioned his recording studio, my father asked if that was financially viable, and my mother wondered aloud if he had a backup plan. "Actually," Marcus said politely, "the studio is doing very well. We've produced 3 albums that have made the indie charts this year, and I just signed a contract to score a documentary series." There was a brief surprised silence before Charlotte smoothly redirected the conversation to her recent business trip to New York, where she'd apparently dined at a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign. Later that night, in the twin beds of my childhood bedroom, my parents being firmly against unmarried couples sharing rooms under their roof, despite us being in our late 20s and living together in San Francisco, Marcus whispered, Now I understand why you moved 3,000 miles away. The next day, we escaped to the lighthouse to visit Grandpa William. The difference in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. William welcomed Marcus warmly, genuinely interested in his music and his thoughts. They bonded over vintage vinyl records and the acoustics of different spaces. I can see why this place means so much to Ruby, Marcus said as we walked along the rocky shoreline. It has a soul. William nodded approvingly. You've got a good one here, Ruby Tuesday. On our last evening at the lighthouse, with William having gone to bed early, Marcus and I climbed to the top of the tower. The moon was nearly full, casting a silver path across the dark Atlantic. As we looked out over the water, Marcus took my hand. I've been thinking about something, he said, his voice almost lost in the sound of the waves below. This place, this moment with you, it feels right in a way nothing else has. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, hand-carved with a lighthouse design. Ruby Harrison, he said, opening the box to reveal a vintage ring with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds like stars around a midnight sea. Will you marry me? My answer was immediate and certain. Yes. The sapphire caught the moonlight as he slipped it onto my finger, and for a moment it seemed to glow with the same intensity as the lighthouse beam behind us. We told William first thing the next morning. His joy was uncontained as he hugged us both. The lighthouse has witnessed many love stories, he said, but this one might be my favorite. When we shared the news with my parents later that day, their reaction was considerably more reserved. Engaged, my mother repeated, as if the word was unfamiliar. But Charlotte's not even engaged yet. My father frowned. Isn't this a bit sudden? How long have you two known each other? 3 years, I reminded him. Well, my mother said, recovering slightly. I suppose congratulations are in order. Have you thought about a date? These things take time to plan properly. At least a year, I would think. Actually, Marcus set his hand firm around mine. We were thinking about next summer, a small ceremony at the lighthouse. My mother's expression froze. The lighthouse? But that's hardly suitable for a wedding. And summer is so soon. Charlotte might be dating someone seriously by then, and it would be nice if you could have a double wedding. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice even, we're not waiting for Charlotte to find someone. We want to get married at the lighthouse because it's special to me, to us. Well, we should probably wait to make any announcements, she said. Let's not rush into anything. That night, as we packed for our return flight to San Francisco, I received a text from Charlotte. Congrats, little sis. Quite the surprise you dropped at dinner. Mom's in a state. I wasn't sure if it was meant to be supportive or smug. With Charlotte, it was often hard to tell. The months following our engagement were a study in family politics. Every phone call with my mother included subtle and not-so-subtle suggestions to postpone our plans. Summer weddings are so hot and uncomfortable, she would say, and the lighthouse doesn't even have proper facilities. Wouldn't you prefer the country club where members you know? I held firm, explaining that we had already spoken with a local event planner who specialized in unusual venues. The lighthouse grounds had plenty of space for a tent, portable restrooms could be brought in, and the keeper's house would provide a perfect getting-ready space for the wedding party. It just seems like you're rushing, my mother persisted. And what about Charlotte? Don't you think it might be difficult for her to watch her younger sister get married first? That was the crux of it, finally spoken aloud. In the Harrison family hierarchy, Charlotte was supposed to do everything first. She was the trailblazer, the standard setter. By daring to marry before her, I was disrupting the natural order as my parents saw it. Charlotte is 34, Mom, I pointed out. If she wanted to be married by now, she would be. She's been focused on her career, my mother defended. You know how demanding law is, and she needs to find someone worthy of her accomplishments. The subtext was clear. Marcus, with his recording studio and indie band connections, would never have been worthy of Charlotte. By extension, he was barely acceptable for me. Meanwhile, Grandpa William threw himself into our wedding plans with enthusiasm. Though his health was noticeably declining, he tired more easily, and occasionally seemed confused. He insisted on being involved. I want to see this place shine for your big day, he said, walking the grounds with me and pointing out where flowers could be planted, where the caterers could set up. With William's blessing, we set a date for June 15th and sent out save-the-date cards in January. My parents received theirs without comment, a silence that spoke volumes. In March, just as we were finalizing our guest list, Charlotte called with unexpected news. "I'm engaged," she announced without preamble. "What to who?" I asked, genuinely shocked. The last I'd heard, she wasn't even dating anyone seriously. "His name is Andrew. He's a partner at a firm we often work with. We've been seeing each other for a couple of months." "A couple of months?" I repeated. "And you're already engaged. When she said, echoing words I'd used about Marcus. "We're thinking of a September wedding. Mom's thrilled, of course." That was an understatement. My mother called me within the hour, bubbling with excitement about Charlotte's engagement to such a suitable young man from such a good family. "His father is a judge," she informed me, as if this was the most important qualification for a son-in-law, "and he went to Princeton before Yale Law." "That's great, Mom," I said, trying to sound sincere. "I'm happy for Charlotte." "We're thinking the Hartford Club for the venue," she continued. "Very elegant. And September is such a lovely month for a wedding, don't you think the weather will be perfect?" The implication hung unspoken between us, unlike June at a lighthouse. 2 weeks later, my parents invited us to dinner during a brief visit we made to Connecticut to meet with our wedding planner. The evening began pleasantly enough with discussions of neutral topics, like the unusually warm spring and my father's new golf clubs. Then my mother cleared her throat as dessert was served. "Your father and I have been talking," she began, "and we feel we should address the elephant in the room." I braced myself, feeling Marcus tense beside me. "There's a reason why oldest daughters traditionally marry first," she continued. "It's about family order and respect for seniority. Now that Charlotte and Andrew are engaged, we think it would be appropriate for you to postpone your wedding until after theirs, perhaps next spring." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Mom, our wedding is in 3 months. We've booked everything, sent invitations." "Yes, and that was before Charlotte got engaged," my father interjected. "Circumstances have changed." "Our circumstances haven't changed," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "We're still getting married on June 15th at the lighthouse." My mother's lips thinned. "I'm afraid that puts us in a difficult position. It would be inappropriate for us to attend your wedding when you're deliberately choosing to disregard family tradition." "What tradition?" I asked, my voice rising, despite my efforts to stay calm. "This isn't the Victorian era. There's no rule that says younger siblings can't marry first." "It's about respect," my father said sternly. "Respect for your sister, who has waited to find the right match. Respect for your parents, who have certain expectations about how these milestones should unfold." "And if we don't postpone?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My mother sighed dramatically. "Then I'm afraid we won't be able to attend. Nor will Charlotte, of course. It would be too painful for her to watch her little sister marry before her." The pain that shot through me was sharp and deep, like a physical blow. Despite years of being second best in their eyes, despite knowing that Charlotte would always be their priority, some childish part of me had still hoped they would show up for one of the most important days of my life. Marcus took my hand under the table, his touch grounding me. "That would be your choice," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "But we're getting married on June 15th with or without you there." The rest of the evening passed in strained silence. As we drove back to Grandpa William's cottage where we were staying, tears slid silently down my cheeks. "They're really not going to come," I whispered. Marcus pulled over to the side of the road and turned to face me. "Listen to me, Ruby Harrison. You are the most incredible, talented, kind person I know. If your parents can't see that, it's their loss. We're going to have a beautiful wedding surrounded by people who truly love and support us." "But they're my parents," I said, the words catching on a sob. "Yes, they are," he acknowledged, "and in an ideal world they would put your happiness above their rigid expectations. But we don't live in that world. We live in this one where we have to decide what we'll accept and what we won't." He was right, of course. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my parents' approval, always falling short because I wasn't Charlotte. This was just one more iteration of the same pattern. The lighthouse has always been more of a home to me anyway, I said, finally wiping my tears. The next day, we met with our wedding planner to finalize details. When she asked about the father-daughter dance, I hesitated only briefly before saying, "My grandfather will be walking me down the aisle. He'll do the dance with me as well." William was honored when I asked him. "Nothing would make me prouder," he said, though I noticed he had to sit down halfway through our conversation, his breathing labored. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" I asked, concerned. "Just getting old," he assured me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, but not too old to walk my favorite granddaughter down the aisle. As the wedding date approached, my parents maintained their position. The RSVP card they returned was marked "Will not attend," with no note, no explanation, no well wishes. Charlotte sent a small crystal vase from our registry with a card that read, "Sorry to miss your big day. Andrew and I are swamped with planning our own wedding. Love, C." It hurt, but I refused to let their absence overshadow our joy. My friends from San Francisco were flying in. Marcus's large, boisterous family from Chicago had rented a block of rooms at the local inn. My college roommate would be my maid of honor, and Marcus's brother would serve as best man. The week before the wedding, I received a package at William's cottage. Inside was my mother's wedding veil wrapped in tissue paper. There was no note from my mother, just a small card from Maggie, their longtime housekeeper. "I thought you should have this," Maggie had written. "Every bride deserves something from her mother on her wedding day." The gesture brought fresh tears, but also a sense of connection to a family history that transcended my parents' current disappointment. The delicate lace veil had been worn by my grandmother, then my mother, and now would be part of my ceremony too. On the morning of June 15th, I woke in the small bedroom of the keeper's house where I had spent so many childhood summers. Through the window, I could see the white tent being set up on the grassy area overlooking the ocean, chairs arranged in rows, facing the spot where Marcus and I would say our vows with the lighthouse as our backdrop. The day was perfect: clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, temperatures in the mid-70s. As my friends helped me dress and the makeup artist put finishing touches on my face, I felt a surprising sense of peace. This was exactly where I was meant to be, with exactly the right person. When I was ready, my grandfather knocked on the door. He looked distinguished in his navy suit, his white hair neatly combed, his face shining with pride. "Ruby Tuesday," he said, his voice catching as he saw me in my simple silk gown with my mother's veil cascading down my back. "You're the most beautiful bride this old lighthouse has ever seen." He offered his arm, and though I could feel a slight tremor in it, he stood tall as we made our way down to where the guests were gathered. The ceremony was everything we had hoped for. Marcus's face when he saw me walking toward him, the personal vows we had written, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks as we exchanged rings. All of it felt magical, meaningful, true to who we were as a couple. During the reception, William insisted on dancing with me despite his obvious fatigue. "I've been practicing," he confided as we moved slowly around the dance floor. "Your grandmother would be so proud of the woman you've become." I wish Mom and Dad could have seen this. I admitted the one shadow on an otherwise perfect day. "They made their choice," William said firmly. "But look around you, Ruby. Look at all these people who showed up to celebrate you and Marcus. That's your real family, the one you've chosen, and who have chosen you." He was right. The tent was filled with laughter and love, with people who supported our dreams and valued our happiness. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the celebration, Marcus and I slipped away for a few minutes to climb to the top of the lighthouse. From there, we could see our wedding in its entirety, the white tent glowing in the twilight, our friends and loved ones dancing the ocean, stretching endlessly beyond. Marcus pulled me close and we stood in silence, committing the scene to memory. "I'm sorry your parents missed this," he said softly. "I am too," I replied. "But I wouldn't change anything. This day, this place, you, it's all exactly right." As if in agreement, the lighthouse beam came on automatically, as darkness fell sweeping across the water in its ancient rhythm of warning and welcome. We rejoined our guests for the rest of the evening, cutting the cake, tossing the bouquet, dancing until the last song played. As the celebration wound down, I noticed William sitting quietly at a table looking pale and exhausted. "Grandpa, are you okay?" I asked, kneeling beside him. "You should have gone to bed hours ago." "And miss any of this?" "Not a chance," he said, squeezing my hand. "Best day of my life watching you so happy." I insisted on walking him back to the cottage, making sure he took his medication before saying goodnight. "I love you, Grandpa," I said, kissing his cheek. "Thank you for everything." "Love you too, Ruby Tuesday," he replied. "Always have, always will." The next morning, I received a call that would change everything. "Ruby." The voice on the phone was unfamiliar professional. "This is Nurse Jacobs from Lawrence Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about William Porter. He's been admitted with chest pains." My world tilted on its axis. "Is he okay?" "What happened?" "He's stable for now, but he's asking for you. The doctors want to run some tests." Marcus and I threw on clothes and raced to the hospital 30 minutes away. We found William in the cardiac unit, hooked up to monitors, looking suddenly much older than his 75 years. "I'm fine," he insisted when he saw my worried face. "Just a little hiccup with the old ticker. Probably overdid it yesterday." The doctor had a different assessment when we spoke in the hallway. "Your grandfather has had a significant cardiac event," she explained gently. "We're concerned about the extent of the damage. His age and previous heart issues complicate matters." "But he'll recover?" I asked, clinging to hope. The doctor's hesitation was answer enough. "We're doing everything we can," she said. "The next 48 hours will be critical." I called my parents from the hospital waiting room, my hands shaking as I dialed their number. "Dad, it's Ruby. Grandpa William is in the hospital. It's his heart." There was a long pause before my father spoke. "How serious is it?" "The doctors say it's critical. You and Mom should come." Another pause. "We'll be there as soon as we can." They arrived 2 hours later, my mother's face drawn with worry. Whatever tension existed between us was temporarily set aside in our shared concern for William. "Have they said anything more?" My mother asked, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "They're running more tests," I explained, "but it doesn't look good. They mentioned congestive heart failure." My mother sank into a waiting room chair, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "He seemed fine when we saw him last month. Tired, but fine." "He's been pushing himself for the wedding," I said without accusation. "He wanted everything to be perfect." Before my mother could respond, a nurse approached to say we could visit William 2 at a time. My parents went first, while Marcus and I weighted his arm around my shoulders, anchoring me as my world seemed to shift beneath my feet. When my parents emerged from William's room, my mother's eyes were red-rimmed. "He wants to see you and Marcus," she said softly. William was awake, but clearly weakened, his skin ashen against the white hospital sheets. His face brightened slightly when we entered. "There's my girl," he said, his voice raspy. "And her handsome husband." "Grandpa," I said, taking his hand. "You scared us." "Didn't mean to," he replied. "Especially not right after your wedding. Some timing, huh?" "The doctors say you need to rest," I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. "So no more dancing for a while, okay?" He smiled faintly. "Worth it, though. Best wedding I've ever been to." His gaze shifted to the small table beside his bed, where a few personal items had been placed. "Ruby, could you hand me my phone? Want to show you something?" I found his old flip phone and handed it to him. With shaky fingers, he navigated to the photo gallery. "Asked one of your photographer friends to send me these yesterday," he said, holding the phone where we could see the small screen. "Wanted to have them right away." The images were from our wedding professional shots, showing the ceremony with the lighthouse in the background, the reception tent glowing at sunset, Marcus and me during our first dance. Despite the small screen and low resolution, the beauty of the day was evident. "It was perfect, wasn't it?" William said, more statement than question. "It was," I agreed, tears welling in my eyes. William's gaze met mine, suddenly intense despite his weakness. "Promise me something. Anything. Be happy. Live your life on your terms, and take care of our lighthouse." "I promise," I whispered, "but you'll be there too, watching me do it." He smiled, but didn't contradict me, which scared me more than anything. The next few days passed in a blur of hospital corridors, whispered consultations with doctors and vigils by William's bedside. His condition stabilized but remained serious. The damage to his heart was extensive, and at his age, the prognosis for full recovery was guarded at best. My parents stayed at a nearby hotel, coming to the hospital each day. Charlotte flew in from Hartford on the third day, looking uncomfortable in the sterile hospital environment. Marcus and I remained at the lighthouse, driving back and forth to the hospital, trying to balance our worry with practical matters like canceling our honeymoon to Maui. It was during this stressful time that an unexpected moment of connection occurred between my mother and me. I had stepped out of William's room to get some air and found her sitting alone in the small hospital garden, her usually perfect posture slumped. "Mom," I approached cautiously. "Are you okay?" She looked up, her eyes red from crying. "He's always been there," she said. "My whole life. Even when I disagreed with him, even when I thought I knew better, he was my constant." She paused, seeming to really see me for the first time in years. "Like he's been for you." I sat beside her on the bench. "He's the strongest person I know. He'll fight." "I saw the wedding photos," she said abruptly. "On his phone. He was showing them to your father." I tensed, waiting for criticism about the venue, the informality, the break with tradition. "It was beautiful," she said instead, her voice soft. "The lighthouse, the ocean backdrop. You looked radiant." The compliment, so unexpected, left me speechless. "I wish," she started, then stopped herself. "William said we made a mistake, missing your wedding." Her hands twisted in her lap. "He said some traditions aren't worth the cost." "He's a wise man," I said carefully. "Yes." She straightened, her moment of vulnerability passing. "He always has been." It wasn't an apology, but it was something, an acknowledgement perhaps, that their choices had consequences, that some things couldn't be undone. The following week, as William grew strong enough to have longer conversations, he asked to see my parents and me together. Charlotte had already returned to Hartford, citing work commitments. "I need to say something to all of you," William began once we were gathered around his hospital bed. "And I need you to really hear me." His gaze swept over us, lingering on my mother. "Elizabeth, Richard, you have two daughters. Not one exceptional daughter and one spare. Two unique, valuable, wonderful women." My mother started to speak, but William raised a hand to stop her. "I'm not finished. For years, I've watched you favor Charlotte, push Ruby aside, measure her against standards that were never fair. And I said nothing because I didn't want to overstep. That was my mistake." He turned to me. "And Ruby, my darling girl, you've spent too many years seeking approval from people who weren't ready to give it. That stops now." Finally, he addressed all of us. "Life is too short for these divisions. I'm asking you, no, I'm insisting that you find a way forward together. As a family. A real family. Where everyone is valued for who they are, not who someone else wants them to be." There was a heavy silence when he finished speaking. My father cleared his throat. "We've always wanted the best for both our daughters." "No," William said firmly. "You've wanted what you thought was best. There's a difference." He looked at me. "Show them the photos again. All of them." I took out my phone where I had saved the professional wedding photographs and handed it to my father. He and my mother scrolled through them slowly, images of the lighthouse at sunset. The simple but elegant decorations, Marcus and me exchanging vows against the backdrop of the Atlantic. "This is where you got married?" my father asked, looking up from a particularly stunning aerial shot, showing the lighthouse, the keeper's house, and the reception tent nestled on the grassy bluff overlooking the ocean. "Yes," I confirmed. "It's been a special place for me since childhood, and now it belongs to me." "What do you mean it belongs to you?" my mother asked sharply. I explained about William's gift, how he had purchased the property when the Preservation Society privatized it, how he had transferred ownership to me on my 25th birthday. "I had no idea," my mother said, looking at her father with new understanding. "You never told us." "You never asked," William replied simply. "Just like you never asked about Ruby's photography career, or her exhibitions or the magazine features. You were too busy focusing on Charlotte's accomplishments to notice that your younger daughter was building an impressive life of her own. The words hung in the air, uncomfortable but true. The lighthouse wedding photos, my father said slowly. They're extraordinary. Ruby's friend Mia took them, Marcus explained. She's a professional photographer who specializes in destination weddings. They look like something from a magazine, my mother admitted. What none of us knew then was that the photos would indeed end up in a magazine, several, in fact. Mia had submitted a selection to a wedding publication, which featured them in their unique venues section. From there, they were picked up by a coastal living magazine, then a travel publication. Within months, the lighthouse wedding would become a minor sensation in wedding and travel circles. But that was still in the future. In that hospital room, we were just a family trying to navigate the choppy waters of long-established patterns, guided by the steady beam of William's wisdom and love. As his strength gradually returned, William continued to insist on conversations that had been avoided for years. He made my parents talk about their expectations, their disappointments, their hopes. He made me express hurts I had buried deep. It was uncomfortable, sometimes painful, but also cathartic. And slowly, tentatively, things began to shift. My mother asked genuine questions about my photography business. My father inquired about Marcus's recording studio with real interest rather than skepticism. I shared more about my life in San Francisco, about the creative community I'd found there, about the success I'd achieved on my own terms. When William was finally released from the hospital, 2 weeks after his heart attack, it was with strict limitations on his activities and a complex medication regimen. The doctors were clear. His heart had sustained significant damage, and while he could live a relatively normal life with proper care, his long-term prognosis remained guarded. "I'm moving in with you," my mother announced to William. "Just until you're back on your feet." William looked like he might argue, then surprisingly acquiesced. "All right, Lizzie, but just temporarily. I'm not giving up my independence." My mother hadn't been called Lizzie since she was a girl, and the nickname seemed to soften something in her. "Of course not, Dad. Just until you're stronger." Marcus and I extended our stay in Connecticut for another week to help William settle back into the keeper's house, now equipped with new medical alert devices and modified for safer mobility. During that time, my parents visited daily, bringing meals, helping with household tasks, and continuing the conversations William had started. On our last night before returning to San Francisco, my father asked to speak with me privately. We walked along the edge of the property, the lighthouse beam sweeping over us every few seconds. "I've been thinking a lot about what your grandfather said," he began awkwardly, "about how we've treated you and Charlotte differently." I waited unsure where this was going. "I'm not good at this sort of thing," he continued, talking about feelings, admitting mistakes. "But I know we've been unfair to you for a long time." The admission, so unexpected, left me momentarily speechless. "Your wedding," he went on. "We should have been there. I should have walked my daughter down the aisle, tradition be damned." He stopped walking and turned to face me. "I'm sorry, Ruby. Truly sorry." "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot to me." He nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the vulnerability of the moment, but pressing on anyway. "Your grandfather showed us some of your published work. The Lighthouse series, the architectural studies. They're remarkable. You have a real talent." Coming from my father, who had dismissed my photography as a hobby for years, this was high praise indeed. "I'd like to commission you," he said suddenly, "for a portrait of your mother and me, for our anniversary in October, if you're willing." It was an olive branch, a way of acknowledging my professional accomplishments, of seeing me as the adult I had become, rather than the child who had failed to be Charlotte. "I'd be honored," I said. When Marcus and I finally returned to San Francisco, it was with a sense that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with my parents. It wasn't fixed years of patterns couldn't be undone in a few weeks, but a door had opened, allowing for the possibility of something new, something healthier. That opening widened unexpectedly when 2 months after our wedding, the lighthouse photos went viral in the wedding planning community. The combination of the dramatic setting, the perfect weather, and Mia's exceptional eye had created a collection of images that captured imaginations. Soon, inquiries began coming in from couples wanting to know if the lighthouse was available as a wedding venue. At first, I directed them to other coastal properties, explaining that the lighthouse was private. But as the inquiries increased, Marcus and I began to consider the possibilities. The property is quite large, he pointed out during a late-night discussion. There's plenty of room for occasional events without disturbing the actual lighthouse operations. Grandpa always said I could use it for exhibitions, I mused. A wedding is just a different kind of exhibition, really. We decided to test the waters by offering the property for a limited number of small weddings the following summer. The response was overwhelming. Within weeks, all available dates were booked mostly by couples who had seen our wedding photos and fallen in love with the setting. When I called William to discuss the idea, he was enthusiastically supportive. The lighthouse has always been about guiding people home, he said. Helping couples start their journey together seems like a natural extension of that purpose. My parents surprisingly were also supportive. My mother even offered to help coordinate with local vendors she knew, given that I would be managing things from California. Your wedding photos in that magazine were stunning, she admitted. Charlotte showed them to her wedding planner, who said the lighthouse setting was inspired, and asked if it was available for other events. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents, who had refused to attend my lighthouse wedding, were now watching as that very choice became something others sought to emulate. But I chose not to dwell on the past, focusing instead on the opportunity before us. By the following summer, lighthouse weddings had become a small but thriving business. Marcus and I would fly back to Connecticut for each event, combining our skills, my eye for visual aesthetics and his audio expertise, to create unique experiences for each couple. William, though limited by his health, took joy in watching the property come alive with celebrations. Charlotte and Andrew's September wedding at the Hartford Club went ahead as planned, a lavish affair with hundreds of guests, elaborate floral arrangements, and a live orchestra. I attended with Marcus, our relationship with my sister still strained, but improving incrementally. The event was beautiful in a traditional way, but lacked the personal touch and intimate connection that had made our lighthouse ceremony so special. Your wedding was prettier, Charlotte admitted during a rare moment alone at her reception. Don't tell Mom I said that. It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd had in years. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, William's health remained stable but fragile. He moved permanently into the main house at the lighthouse, with a part-time nurse checking on him daily, and my mother visiting several times a week. Our phone calls became a cherished routine, with William always eager to hear about our latest photography projects and wedding bookings. I want to see the lighthouse through all 4 seasons again, he told me during one call. The winter storms, the spring flowers, the summer sun, the fall colors. One more complete cycle. He got his wish living to see another full turn of the seasons. But as the leaves began to change the following autumn, his strength finally failed. My mother called on a crisp October morning, her voice steady but tight with grief. He went peacefully in his sleep, she said, looking out at his lighthouse. The funeral was held in the small chapel where William had taken me for Christmas services during childhood visits. The building was filled to capacity, a testament to the many lives he had touched during his 76 years. In his will, William left the bulk of his modest estate to me, including full ownership of the lighthouse property. But more valuable than any material inheritance was the foundation he had helped lay for a new relationship with my parents, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than disappointed expectations. At the reception following the funeral, held at the lighthouse, William had loved so dearly. My father approached me with a small wooden box. "Your grandfather wanted you to have this," he said, handing it to me. Inside was a collection of vintage lighthouse keepers' logs dating back to the 1920s, and a handwritten note in William's shaky script. "For Ruby Tuesday, keeper of the light teller of stories, captor of moments. Continue the log in your own way. Love always, Grandpa." It was the perfect gift, a bridge between his stewardship of the lighthouse and mine. In the months that followed, as grief gradually gave way to fond remembrance, Marcus and I made a decision that would shape the next chapter of our lives. What if we moved back? Marcus suggested one evening as we sat in our San Francisco apartment looking at lighthouse wedding bookings that now stretch 2 years into the future. Not permanently, but maybe part of the year. Winter in California, summer in Connecticut. The idea took root, growing stronger as we discussed the possibilities. Marcus could set up a second recording studio in the keeper's house. I could expand my photography to include more East Coast clients. We could personally oversee the wedding business during the busy season. And perhaps most importantly, we could build a different kind of relationship with my family. One based on who we were now rather than who we had been. 3 years have passed since that decision, and our lives have transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The lighthouse is now our primary residence for 8 months of the year, with winters spent in a smaller apartment in San Francisco. The keeper's house has been fully renovated to include a state-of-the-art recording studio for Marcus and a gallery space for my photography. Lighthouse Weddings has grown from a small side business to a thriving enterprise with a waiting list. We host only 20 events per year, keeping each one intimate and personally curated. The exclusivity has only increased demand, with features in major wedding publications and a devoted social media following. But the most significant transformation has been in my family relationships. My parents, who once refused to attend my wedding because it didn't fit their expectations, now regularly visit the lighthouse, sometimes helping with event preparations or just enjoying the peaceful setting. "Your grandfather was right about this place," my mother admitted one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, much as William and I had done years before. "It does have a magic to it." She had changed in subtle but meaningful ways since William's passing, and her own health scare, a breast cancer diagnosis that thankfully was caught early and successfully treated. The experience seemed to soften her rigid adherence to social expectations, opening her to new possibilities. My father, too, had evolved. His retirement from the law firm 2 years ago had freed him from the corporate mindset that had defined much of his life. He took up painting just as a hobby. He insisted, though, his seascapes showed genuine talent and became more reflective, more willing to question the values that had guided his earlier years. "I wish I had seen things more clearly when you girls were growing up," he told me once. "Charlotte was so much like me, so easy to understand. You were a mystery like your grandmother. I didn't know how to connect with that part of you." It wasn't a complete explanation for years of favoritism, but it was an honest acknowledgement, and I appreciated it for what it was. Charlotte's life had taken unexpected turns as well. Her marriage to Andrew lasted less than 2 years, ending when his affair with a paralegal at his firm came to light. The divorce was bitter and public, leaving Charlotte disillusioned with the carefully structured life plan she had followed. In the aftermath, she surprised everyone by taking a sabbatical from her law practice and traveling alone through Europe for 6 months. When she returned, she was changed, more reflective, less competitive, more open to connections outside her professional circle. "I spent so many years trying to be what Mom and Dad wanted," she confided during a rare sister's weekend at the lighthouse. "I never stopped to ask what I wanted." It was the most vulnerable I'd ever seen my sister, and it opened the door to a more authentic relationship between us. We would never be best friends too much. History, too many ingrained patterns separated us. But we found a way to appreciate each other as the adults we had become, rather than the rivals we had been raised to be. The most profound change in my life, however, came with the birth of our daughter Willow, named in honor of William. Her arrival just over a year ago brought a joy I had never experienced, a love so intense it sometimes took my breath away. "She has your grandfather's eyes," my mother said when she first held her new granddaughter. "That same curious look, like she's taking in everything." Watching my parents with Willow has been a study in redemption. They dote on her, respecting our parenting choices, while offering support that never feels like interference. It's as if they're determined to get it right this time, to love without conditions or comparisons. Last week, as I photographed a wedding at the lighthouse, a small, intimate gathering for a couple who had fallen in love with the venue through our website, I found myself thinking about how far we had come. The bride's parents had divorced bitterly when she was young, but both were present, setting aside old hurts to celebrate their daughter's happiness. As the ceremony concluded and the guests moved to the reception tent, I took a moment to climb to the top of the lighthouse tower. From there, I could see the entire property, the white tent glowing in the early evening light, the manicured grounds where guests mingled with champagne glasses, the rocky coastline where the waves crashed in eternal rhythm. I thought about the day of my own wedding, about the parents who weren't there, about the grandfather who was. I thought about how the place they had rejected had become the foundation of my successful life, how their absence had ultimately led to a presence more meaningful than I could have imagined. Sometimes the best revenge isn't confrontation, but creation, building something so beautiful from rejection that those who rejected you can only stand in awe of what they missed. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Willow just woke from her nap. She's asking for Mama. Take your time, we've got her. But thought you should know. I smiled, thinking of my daughter in my parents' arms, loved and cherished exactly as she is. The healing wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that occasionally reasserted themselves, but it was real, and it was enough. As I descended from the tower to rejoin the celebration below, I sent a silent thank you to Grandpa William, whose gift of the lighthouse had become so much more than a piece of property. It was a beacon that had guided me home to myself, a foundation upon which I had built a life of authenticity and purpose, a light that had ultimately helped my family find their way back to each other. Have you ever stood your ground when it mattered most, even when it meant disappointing those closest to you? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes choosing yourself leads to the most beautiful outcomes. Thank you all for listening, and remember, sometimes the path that feels lonely at first leads to the most spectacular view.